What's up, everybody? So, I was watching SportsCenter earlier today, and they had a really interesting segment that caught my attention. They started breaking down the situation with Highsmith and how his name could actually end up being tied to the Lakers in the near future. Now, let me be clear. They weren't talking about him like he's some superstar or a franchise changer, nothing like that. What they were saying is that in the current NBA landscape, especially with how teams are looking to fill out rotation, a guy like Highsmith can be really valuable. He's that classic 3-and-D type of wing who brings size, energy, and defensive versatility. And the conversation got even more intriguing when they connected it back to potential moves involving someone bigger, like an Andrew Wiggins type of trade. The point that was made was pretty simple. If the Lakers do end up making a splash for a player of that caliber, chances are you're going to need a third team involved. And that's where a guy like Highsmith could come into play. SportsCenter tossed around the idea of Brooklyn being that middleman, the team that helps facilitate the deal, while also moving Highsmith in the process. That's the kind of creative framework teams are using these days, and it really makes sense. Think about it. Let's say the Lakers give up someone like Gabe Vincent in a bigger trade. You don't just want to lose depth, you want to make sure you're replenishing it with players who can step in right away. Slotting in Marcus Smart at the 1, pairing him with a long wing like Highsmith at the 2, then adding Wiggins at the 3. Now all of a sudden, you've got a defensive core with real size and switchability. SportsCenter really highlighted that length, talking about Smart's wingspan, Highsmith's near 7-foot wingspan, and then Wiggins' ability to play both ends of the floor. It paints a picture of a roster that could be much tougher defensively while still keeping shooting and versatility intact. And here's where the Nets come in. What they emphasized was how Brooklyn has basically become the league's go-to third team. Every other week, it feels like the Nets are involved in some trade, not just rumored, but actually executed. They've been taking on contracts, flipping players, and stockpiling second-round picks like it's nothing. SportsCenter even referenced the idea that for the Nets, this is all about asset accumulation. They're not chasing stars right now. They're raising their hand and saying, hey, you need us to make your deal work? We'll take the salary. We'll give you a piece back. Just send us the draft capital. That's why Highsmith makes so much sense. He's on a cheap deal. He's on an expiring contract. And honestly, that makes him attractive to pretty much every contender in the league. SportsCenter brought up the report from the New York Post that said flat out, the expectation is Highsmith will be traded to a contender by the deadline. Brooklyn isn't keeping him long-term. They know he's a movable asset. The goal is simple: showcase him, let him get healthy, put him out there to remind teams what he can do, and then flip him for another pick. And when you think about it from that angle, it really is a win-win for Brooklyn. They already got a second-round pick in the original deal that brought him in, and if they can flip him again at the deadline for another one, that's essentially free value, a home run for a team that's not trying to win right now, but is laser-focused on building a treasure chest of assets. And for the Lakers, or any other contender, it's the perfect situation. You get to swoop in mid-season, add a defensive-minded wing who doesn't cost much, and plug him right into your rotation without blowing up your salary cap. So yeah, listening to that segment, you can see why this is a story to keep an eye on. Highsmith isn't the headline name, but sometimes it's those under-the-radar additions that end up making the biggest difference in a playoff run. So, watching SportsCenter earlier, they went even deeper into the Highsmith situation, and this is where things started to get really interesting. The analysts weren't just looking at him as a short-term rental. They actually broke down the type of contract he could be looking at in the near future. They were saying something along the lines of 4 years, maybe 82 $32 million, possibly up to 40 if the market gets competitive, and that would still keep him in a very manageable range of 8 to 10 million per season. For a player of his profile, a legitimate 3-and-D wing with size, athleticism, and defensive versatility, that's actually a bargain in today's NBA. They emphasized how rare it is to find wings who can defend multiple positions and also space the floor. Highsmith has shown he can do that. He's not the kind of guy who's going to give you 20 points a night, but he doesn't need to be. What teams need from him is exactly what he brings: consistency, energy, and the ability to defend 1 through 3 while hitting shots at a respectable clip. In fact, SportsCenter brought up his numbers: around 7 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists, shooting nearly 46% from the field. That's solid production, and when you pair that with his size, 6'5" with a 7-foot wingspan, you can see why contenders would value him. One point that stuck with me was when they said you could even argue for him to start at the small forward spot on a team like the Lakers. And honestly, they're right. The Lakers have been searching for reliable wing depth for years. Yes, LeBron is still there. Yes, they've got some other options, but that consistent two-way presence has been missing. Highsmith could easily slide into that starting 3 role, give them perimeter defense, switchability, and just enough shooting to space the floor. That's exactly the kind of profile that elevates a roster. But here's where it gets tricky. As they explained, while almost every team in the league could trade for him because his contract is so affordable, the mechanics of actually making the deal work are a little different depending on who's involved. For example, the Lakers don't have those mid-tier contracts that match perfectly with Highsmith's number. To bring him in, they'd probably have to move someone like Gabe Vincent, who makes more than $11 million. That doesn't make sense if you're only getting Highsmith back. So, as the show pointed out, if the Lakers go after him, it's more likely to be part of a larger package, maybe in a 3-team deal where they also land another rotation piece, like a backup center. That was another big takeaway: the idea that pairing moves is the smarter path forward. Don't just add a wing and a big, or a wing and another role player, so you're addressing multiple needs at once. They threw out examples of other teams doing this, grabbing a versatile wing while also shoring up the front court depth, and how that strategy has paid off in recent years. For the Lakers, someone like Highsmith, alongside a solid backup big, could completely change the rotation. Suddenly, you're not only covering LeBron's minutes more effectively, but you're also giving Anthony Davis a reliable partner in the front court rotation. And the bigger point? The Nets know exactly what they're doing. Brooklyn isn't keeping Highsmith long-term. They'll showcase him, let him get some consistent minutes, and then flip him to a contender that's desperate for wing depth before the deadline. And when you think about it, it's the perfect setup for both sides. The Nets get more assets for their rebuild, and a team like the Lakers gets a cost-controlled, reliable player who fits seamlessly into their system. SportsCenter wrapped this segment by saying, "It's hard to imagine a scenario where Highsmith is still on the Nets roster after February. The value is too obvious, the market is too wide, and the need across the league is too great." And honestly, they're right. A second-round pick? Maybe a pick swap? That's probably enough to get it done. For the Lakers, who are still trying to balance the roster around LeBron's timeline, this feels like the exact kind of low-risk, high-reward move that could pay dividends in the postseason. Adding a player like Haywood Highsmith could solve multiple rotation issues for the Lakers. He gives you a reliable option at the wing spot, someone who can slide between the 2 and the 3, and even work in small ball lineups. Imagine defensive-minded units featuring Marcus Smart, Highsmith, Jared Vanderbilt, Andrew Wiggins, and Luca Donic. That's the kind of group that can switch across positions and pressure opponents on every possession. Highsmith's profile fits exactly what Los Angeles has been missing. Entering the league in 2018-19, he took a brief detour in another pro league before establishing himself with Miami in 2021-22. This past season was his most productive, appearing in 74 games and starting 42. He averaged just under 25 minutes, attempting 5.3 shots per game, while shooting 45.8% from the field. From beyond the arc, he connected on 38.2% of his 3.1 attempts per game. For his career, he's right around 37 to 38% from deep, consistent, and dependable. That shooting matters even more in the Lakers system. With playmakers like Doncic, LeBron James, and Austin Reeves drawing defenses in, Highsmith would be seeing the most open looks of his career. For a steady 38% shooter, it wouldn't be surprising if he climbed closer to 40%, simply because of the quality of shots he'd get. Beyond the perimeter, he was solid inside the arc as well, hitting 57% of his two-point attempts, finishing with an effective field goal percentage of 57.2%. Defensively, he adds versatility. Last season, he averaged 3.5 rebounds, 1.1 assists, a steal, half a block, and nearly 7 points per game. Per 36 minutes, that projects to 9.5 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.5 steals, and a block. That's the kind of production any contender would welcome off the bench. For the Lakers, it's exactly the type of 3-and-D role player who complements stars and strengthens the second unit. Pairing Highsmith with someone like Andrew Wiggins and adding another piece such as Day'Ron Sharpe could give this roster the depth and balance to compete for a championship. With those additions, Los Angeles would have a legitimate claim as favorites heading into the 2025-26 season. All right, so let me break down what went on during SportsCenter earlier today, because it turned into a really intriguing conversation about Andrew Wiggins and the Lakers. The way they presented it honestly felt like one of those storylines we've seen play out year after year in the NBA. You know what I mean? Big-name player gets linked early, the asking price is sky high, and then, as training camp starts creeping closer, the conversation shifts, and suddenly, the door opens again. That's exactly where we are with Wiggins right now. The analysts on the show were really diving into how heavily Wiggins has been connected to the Lakers. They pointed out that this isn't some wild prediction or crazy rumor. It's just the same pattern we see almost every offseason. At the start, the Warriors' asking price was considered way too much. But now, with camp right around the corner, the chatter is heating up, and the possibility is back on the table. And here's what made it more interesting. The conversation tied directly into the Lakers securing Luca Donic long-term. The panel explained that once Luca committed, it gave the Lakers a big sense of stability, but also raised expectation. Rob Pelinka has been out front saying the team's goal is clear: compete for a title this season. He doesn't want this front office to just sit back and celebrate keeping Luca, almost like throwing their hands up and saying, "Mission accomplished." Instead, the mindset has to stay aggressive, to keep hunting for the right moves that complete the roster around Luca and LeBron James. That's why Wiggins' name is such a focal point. On SportsCenter, they debated what kind of difference he would actually make. Would adding him really put the Lakers over the top? Because if the front office believed Wiggins was truly the missing piece, the guy who takes them from contender to champion, you'd think they'd already be all in, giving up picks and young players without hesitation. But clearly, that hasn't happened yet. The hesitation, according to the analysts, probably comes down to two things: cost and timing. The Warriors want real value in return, and the Lakers are asking themselves whether it's smart to burn through assets right now. Remember, they're holding on to future picks, and next summer, they'll have even more flexibility. So do you cash those in early? Or wait until you're absolutely sure Wiggins is the guy? That was the core debate. They compared him to players already on the roster, like Rui Hachimura, Dalton Knecht, and Gabe Vincent. The point was, is Wiggins enough of an upgrade over those guys to justify sending out a package that big, including a first-rounder? Some of the analysts were firm. Yes, Wiggins makes the team better today, but others said it feels like an overpay, and if another need pops up mid-season, the Lakers would have no way to address it. That's the kind of gamble that could backfire. Another angle they touched on was the what-if factor. Every team in the league has them. The Clippers had one with Bradley Beal. What if he fits? What if he doesn't? The Thunder, even with all their talent, still have what-ifs because nobody knows how that group will hold up in the postseason. For the Lakers, their what-if is Andrew Wiggins. What if he's the difference maker? Or what if they give up too much and it doesn't push them any closer to a championship? The panel's suggestion was almost like a test. Let the season breathe a little. See which players step up, see where the weaknesses actually are, and then decide whether Wiggins is the piece that solves it. Because if by the middle of the season it's clear they're one wing away, then the Lakers can justify the trade, but if not, patience might be smarter. And one last thing I thought was cool. They didn't just limit the conversation to the Lakers. They also mentioned how other teams are watching this play out. The Knicks came up as an example of a team that's been sneaky in how they add talent without making noise. Quentin Grimes was brought up in that discussion as one of those players who doesn't grab headlines every night, but still represents the kind of piece of franchise values when trying to build depth the right way. It was a reminder that sometimes the names we don't obsess over can be just as important as the big stars everyone talks about. So, yeah, that was the vibe of the segment. It wasn't just about Wiggins possibly going to the Lakers, it was about the bigger picture, about timing, patience, and how franchises have to play the chess game, not just grab the first flashy piece that comes their way. So let me tell you how the conversation kept rolling on SportsCenter, because it really took a turn that caught my attention. After all that talk about Andrew Wiggins, the panel started to bring up this idea of distractions. Like maybe all the noise around Wiggins is just smoke, while something completely different is going on behind the scenes. They literally said it felt like one of those look over here situations, where all the focus is on one guy, but the real move is happening somewhere else. They threw out names like Miles Bridges, even floated the idea of an RJ Barrett type of player, someone younger, versatile, able to play both sides of the floor, and maybe a more balanced fit than what Rui Hachimura is giving the Lakers right now. The way they framed it, it wasn't about one specific name, but more about the type of move the Lakers have pulled off before. We've seen it so many times. The attention is locked on one rumored trade, and then suddenly a deal comes out of nowhere. They even went back to past examples. Remember the Utah trade? Everyone thought that deal was going to look one way. Mike Conley, Rudy Gay, Malik Beasley, but in the end, the Lakers walked away with D'Angelo Russell and Jared Vanderbilt. And when you think about it now, Vanderbilt could still end up being a huge X factor for them if he stays healthy and gets back to his 2023 form. The surprise factor there was massive, and that's exactly the type of curveball the panel suggested might happen again. They listed other names the Lakers had been connected to in the past, like Dorian Finney-Smith, trades that had been talked about heavily before they happened. But then they reminded everyone of the flip side. Some of the biggest moves the Lakers made came totally out of left field, things nobody saw coming. And that's why the hosts were questioning if maybe Wiggins is being talked about too much right now, almost like it's too loud. And that's where it got interesting. One of the analysts said, "Don't be shocked if we wake up one morning and suddenly Miles Bridges is a Laker." Because the vibe right now is all Wiggins, all day, every day. Even the hosts laughed about it, saying they've been talking about Wiggins 3 times a day themselves, because honestly, there's not much else going on. But history tells us that when the Lakers are in the news this much for one guy, something else could be brewing behind the curtain. They painted scenarios too, like what if it's not Wiggins at all? A package deal for someone like Matisse Thybulle and Robert Williams. Imagine the Lakers adding that kind of defensive versatility and interior presence without giving up their entire future. That kind of move would still keep Rui Hachimura in play, keep their depth intact, and let them hold on to picks for another big swing later. That's the kind of creative front office work Pelinka has been praised for in the past. And they stressed this part: Pelinka has to be working the phones beyond just Golden State. It's about leverage. If you're talking with multiple teams, you not only give yourself backup options, you also put pressure on the Warriors. You can basically say, look, if you don't drop your asking price on Wiggins, we'll go somewhere else. That's smart business, and the Lakers know how to play that game. But here's the other layer that they dug into. Who benefits from all this constant chatter about Andrew Wiggins? Think about it. Most of the reporting hasn't come from Miami or other teams. It's been very Laker-driven. The hosts mentioned guys like Jake Fisher, Mark Stein, reporters who are usually tied closely to Lakers stories. And when you see that pattern, you have to ask yourself, is this genuine momentum toward a deal? Or is it all strategic leaks to shift the narrative, distract the public, or even lower someone's trade value? That's where the panel leaned in, saying maybe this Wiggins storyline is as much about controlling the conversation as it is about an actual trade happening. Because, let's be real, if the Lakers really wanted Wiggins that badly, wouldn't it be smarter to just work in silence and get it done? That's exactly what they were hinting at. And it reminded me of something else they mentioned quickly. about how teams like the Knicks operate under the radar. The Knicks aren't out here blasting rumors every other day, but they're steady, they're patient, and they're adding the right pieces when the time comes. A guy like Quentin Grimes was brought up again as an example of that quiet value. He doesn't generate crazy headlines, but his presence shows how franchises can build depth without the constant media storm. So, in the end, SportsCenter left us with this thought. Maybe all this noise around Andrew Wiggins is real, or maybe it's just the shiny distraction while Rob Pelinka and the Lakers are working on something else entirely. And honestly, if you know how this league works, that might not be too far from the truth. And then, to wrap it all up on SportsCenter, they broke it down in a way that made a lot of sense. They said there are basically two ways to look at what's happening with all these Wiggins rumors. On one hand, it could be the Lakers pushing the narrative, creating buzz, and making it look like they're the only team really in the mix. Almost like they're betting against themselves, knowing that Golden State doesn't have many other serious options on the table. From that perspective, the Lakers are saying, hey, you want to move off Wiggins? We can help you do that, but don't expect us to pay full price because we know nobody else is stepping up right now. And that matters, because moving Wiggins isn't as simple as just finding a team that wants him. The panel explained that the Warriors need to check a lot of boxes at once. They need a trade partner that not only values Wiggins, but also has the right expiring contracts to free up $30 million next season. On top of that, it has to be a place Wiggins actually wants to play, because otherwise, he could just ride it out and decide to go elsewhere later. That combination is tricky, and right now, the Lakers look like one of the few teams that actually fit the bill. But here's where it gets clever. Even if Wiggins isn't the guy the Lakers really want, just being in these talks gives them leverage in other negotiations. Let's say Portland calls and asks for Rui Hachimura, a young piece like Dalton Knecht, and a first-round pick for Matisse Thybulle and Robert Williams. The Lakers can point back to Wiggins and say, why would we overpay for two injury-prone players who could walk next year when we could make a similar package for Wiggins, a guy who's better, locked in for an extra season, and makes us a contender right away? That's how the Lakers create a stronger negotiating position. They even expanded on that, showing how Pelinka can play this on multiple fronts. If another team wants too much for a mid-level piece, the Lakers can counter with, look, we can just add Knecht into a deal and get Wiggins instead. He's at least one tier above what you're offering. Suddenly, the Lakers aren't the ones scrambling, they're the ones dictating the term. That's powerful in trade talks. And so, the panel landed on this conclusion. The Wiggins rumors could absolutely be a smokescreen, a distraction to keep everyone's eyes in one place, while another deal comes together quiet. But at the same time, that distraction could still lead to a win. If something else materializes, great. If not, and Wiggins falls into their lap at the right price, also great. Either way, the Lakers end up looking like the masterminds at the end of the movie, where the big twist is revealed and you realize they were in control the whole time. At the same time, they reminded viewers that it could all just be off-season noise. With not much happening around the league right now, it's easy for rumors to snowball. The media runs with it, fans debate it non-stop, and suddenly, it feels bigger than it might actually be. But if history has taught us anything, it's this. When the Lakers dominate the rumor mill, there's usually more to the story than meets the eye. So the takeaway from SportsCenter was simple. Don't dismiss Wiggins as just smoke, but don't get caught thinking that's the only card in play either. For the Lakers, it might just be another step in a bigger chess game that we won't see coming until the deal is already done. So, let me tell you what came up recently on SportsCenter, because it was one of those segments that really gets people talking. The discussion turned to the Los Angeles Lakers, and of course, one of the first things that came up was the uncertainty around their backup center spot. It's no secret that the Lakers have been searching for depth at the wing position, ideally someone who fits the mold of a true 3-and-D player, but right after that, the question was raised about the center rotation. Now, Jackson Hayes is currently penciled in as the main backup, and while there was some optimism about his potential, the panel made it clear that the Lakers still don't have a fully reliable option behind Anthony Davis. Hayes has shown flashes, And when thrust into a starting role last season, he had some good moments. But let's be honest, come playoff time, coaches want someone more proven. Hayes isn't necessarily a bad option, but if the Lakers had the opportunity to bring in someone like Nick Richards or another steady presence, that's the type of upgrade that makes a difference. Still, it's important to remember how rotations tighten up in the postseason. Anthony Davis is likely logging 35 minutes a night, sometimes even more. That leaves maybe 10 minutes for a backup, and in certain matchups, you might not even play a true center at all, instead going small and sliding another forward into the lineup. So yes, the backup center role isn't the most crucial piece, but it's one of those small details that can separate a deep playoff team from a championship team. And here's where things got really interesting. The show pointed out that the Lakers don't necessarily need to pour big money into a backup center, but if you can address that need as part of a bigger deal, you absolutely take it. For example, if you're making a trade for a versatile wing, and you can also land a solid backup center in the package, then you're checking off two boxes at once. That's been the vision in a lot of conversations surrounding LA, finding the right combination of a defensive-minded wing and a reliable big man. That's exactly why Daniel Gafford's name came up again. We've heard his name connected to the Lakers for a while now, but it's resurfaced in a big way since Dallas acquired Luca Donic and started reshaping their roster. Gaffford, who fans know as the landlord, just signed a 3-year extension with the Mavericks worth a little over $4 million, about $18 million per season. And here's the key detail. A lot of insiders believe Dallas signed him with the idea of trading him later. It wasn't just about locking him up long-term, it was about increasing his value on the market and getting more serious offers from teams like the Lakers. When Gafford's name was floated before the extension, there wasn't much traction because teams didn't know what kind of contract he'd command, and nobody wanted to give up assets for a player who might leave in free agency. Now, with his contract in place, he becomes a much more attractive trade piece. And although Dallas can't move him right away due to league rules, his situation is definitely something to monitor, especially with Anthony Davis coming off surgery for a detached retina and questions already popping up about his availability at the start of the season. The Mavericks need Gaffford and Derek Lively for depth, but that hasn't stopped rumors from flying. That's what led to one of the more intriguing proposals discussed on the show. It was a 3-team framework involving the Lakers, Mavericks, and Nets. And you know, Brooklyn always seems to be in the middle of these things. They're in asset-collecting mode, stockpiling contracts and picks, while constantly floating in and out of multi-team trade talks. The structure was this. Los Angeles would land Daniel Gaffford and Highsmith. That means you're filling the backup center role and also bringing in a proven 3-and-D wing who has playoff experience and defensive toughness. Dallas would get Gabe Vincent, a 2031 first-round pick from the Lakers, plus a 2026 pick swap. And Brooklyn, in classic Nets fashion, would take on Dalton Neck, Jackson Hayes, and a 2030 second-round pick from Dallas. That was the starting point of the conversation, and it raised plenty of debate on the panel about whether the Lakers should go all in on this type of deal. All right, so let's break down how this trade would actually shake out, because the numbers and the logistics were a big part of the discussion on SportsCenter. Essentially, Dallas would be shipping out Daniel Gaffford along with a second-round pick. The Lakers, on the other hand, would be sending out Gabe Vincent, a first-round pick, a pick swap, Dalton Knecht, and Jackson Hayes. Then Brooklyn would be sending Highsmith over to LA. So you immediately see there's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of pieces shifting between 3 teams, which is classic in these kind of multi-team trade talks. Now, when you start looking at the salaries, it gets even more interesting. Gabe Vincent is making about $11, $5 million, Jackson Hayes around $2 to $2.5 million, which brings the Lakers' outgoing salary to roughly $13 to $14 million. Dalton Knecht adds another $18 million into the mix. So, on paper, it roughly balances out, but the big question that the analysts raised is whether this actually fills out the roster spot efficiently. because you're sending out 3 players to bring in 2. There might need to be a little retooling here, maybe a tweak somewhere, but the concept is intriguing. Here's the crux of the argument. Would the Lakers be willing to give up a first-round pick and a pick swap just for Daniel Gaffford, knowing that the backup center role is important but not critical? The consensus on the show seemed to be maybe not just for Gaffford alone. The value proposition makes more sense when you consider that you're getting long-term insurance behind Anthony Davis. There was a lot of talk about the what-if scenarios. What if DeAndre Ayton doesn't work out for you? Or what if he excels but then gets offered a contract that's way too rich for your cap? Gaffford provides that safety net. He's locked in for 3 years, and he's versatile enough to slot into that backup role while also having the potential to start if needed. Then there's Highsmith. The panel was very clear that bringing him in immediately improves the rotation. He's a true 3-and-D player, bigger, longer, and more experienced than someone like Gabe Vincent in that type of role. He fits seamlessly into the Lakers system, which is exactly what you want for a team with championship aspiration. Essentially, by acquiring both Gaffford and Highsmith, you are solving 2 major roster issues in one move. You still have Rui Hachimura for depth, and while Dalton Knecht and some picks go out, the upside seems significant. The discussion then explored hypothetical scenarios. What if the Lakers could combine this package with an Andrew Wiggins trade? The panel laid it out. Imagine Gaffford as your backup center, Highsmith as your 3-and-D wing, and Wiggins as that additional versatile scorer. Add in the possibility of filling remaining roster spots with someone like DeAnthony Melton, and suddenly you're staring at a lineup that's legitimately built to compete for a championship. One of the analysts even said, if you can get all 3, Gaffford, Highsmith, and Wiggins, healthy, the Lakers aren't just contenders for 1 year. They could be hoisting the Larry O'Brien Trophy and potentially repeating depending on how long LeBron stays in peak form. Of course, there were also cautionary notes on the show. Some argued this might be a bit of an overpay because Dallas gave up a first to get Gaffford initially and would want to recoup that value. The panel pointed out that just because Dallas made that decision doesn't automatically mean LA should pay a similar price. Solving the backup center problem is valuable, yes, but is it the most efficient use of first-round assets? That was a key question. It really comes down to how much the Lakers value long-term security versus flexibility for other moves. So, in short, the Sports Center segment laid out the logic, the numbers, and the hypothetical scenarios, and it made for a really fun discussion. Could the Lakers actually pull this off at the trade deadline? It's complicated, but from a strategic standpoint, getting both Gaffford and Highsmith addresses 2 key weaknesses in one fell swoop. And if you could somehow add Wiggins on top of that, you're looking at a roster that's not just playoff ready. It's built to compete for a title right now. Now, when we break down the final part of this discussion, it really comes down to the big picture strategy for the Lakers. You know, the big question the Sports Center panel kept circling back to was, is Daniel Gaffford really the best allocation of resources at $18 million a year for a backup center? And I get it. On paper, he's a versatile player, someone who could be a long-term piece. But realistically, if DeAndre Ayton pans out, how many minutes is Gaffford really going to see? You're paying a guy top-tier backup money, and you start thinking, is that the most efficient way to spend your cap space? One analyst made a really interesting point. You could potentially get 2 solid backups for the price of Daniel Gaffford. That alone sparks a lot of debate, because while adding Highsmith and Gaffford does give you depth, the price might be a bit steep for what is essentially a role that Jackson Hayes can handle just fine. Hayes had a strong showing as a backup last year. Sure, Gaffford might be a slightly better player on paper, but when it comes to minutes, role, opportunity, and production, Hayes is already serviceable. The Lakers have built-in flexibility. Some nights, Hayes might even DNP because you're running 8-and-heavy minutes or small ball lineups, and that's perfectly fine. You can't really do that with an $18 million Gaffford. He needs to be on the floor to justify that salary. The panel also emphasized the timing of this potential trade. If the Lakers manage to secure Andrew Wiggins before the season, or by training camp, that could change the calculus entirely. With Wiggins locked in, adding Gaffford and Highsmith could be the perfect cherry on top. Suddenly, you've got a backup center who can start if needed, a 3-and-D wing who fits seamlessly into your rotation, and a versatile scorer in Wiggins. That's a combination that elevates the ceiling of this roster tremendously, potentially turning them into legitimate championship favorites. Of course, there's the cautionary side. Some experts noted that giving up a first-round pick and a pick swap might be an overpay, especially if Hayes proves himself healthy and capable. But the counterpoint? If the difference between hoisting the Larry O'Brien Trophy and an early-round playoff exit comes down to having Gaffford and Highsmith, then the trade could make sense. It's all about weighing immediate championship potential against long-term asset management. So the conclusion on SportsCenter was essentially this: if the opportunity presents itself reasonably, and especially if Andrew Wiggins is already in the fold, pulling the trigger on Gaffford and Highsmith might be too good to pass up. The Lakers could instantly improve depth at two critical positions and give themselves a legitimate shot at contending, maybe even repeating as champions depending on health and chemistry. If they wait too long or hesitate, they risk losing a chance to add significant pieces to an already talented roster. Anyway, that's the conversation they had on SportsCenter, and it's really fascinating to think about the domino effect this kind of trade could have on the Lakers' season. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? Are you all in on the idea, against it, or somewhere in the middle? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that like button. It really helps me continue making content like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown. Appreciate all of you, and I'll see you in the next one. What's up, everybody? So earlier today on SportsCenter, there was this really interesting segment that caught my attention, and I've got to share it with you because it ties directly into the Lakers and some of the moves that might be coming down the line. They were talking about Luca Donic and the comments he recently made about the toughest defenders he's had to deal with in the league. Now, Luca's not the kind of guy to just throw out random names. When he singles someone out, it's because he really feels it. And the two names that he mentioned? Marcus Smart and Herb Jones. Now, this is where it gets really intriguing for Lakers fans. Marcus Smart, of course, is already in LA. Luca has always wanted to play alongside him. That's not a secret. He has a ton of respect for Smart's defensive ability, his grit, the way he just makes life miserable for opposing stars. Luca even reached out to him before, trying to get him to join up. And now, it's finally happened. That's already a huge win. But here's where the speculation starts to build. The second name Luca mentioned was Herb Jones. And if you've been following the Lakers closely, you know that Herb's name has floated around their orbit before. He's exactly the type of player they've lacked at times. Versatile, long, disruptive defensively, and still young enough to be considered a piece for the future. He's 26 now, about to turn 27 by the time the season starts, and that's right in the sweet spot of his prime. Think about this. You pair Luca with Smart, and then potentially add Herb Jones into that mix. Suddenly, you're talking about two elite-level perimeter defenders who can guard multiple positions. Herb can slot in at the 2, 3, or even the 4, depending on the matchup. He's that kind of flexible piece who fits the modern NBA perfectly. If DeAndre Ayton settles into a steady role, and if a younger wing like Ade Mara, or whoever the Lakers groom, can learn under a guy like Herb, you've basically locked down your wings for years to come. That's the kind of long-term roster security teams dream about. Now, here's the reality check. Herb Jones can't be moved until January 14th, so realistically we're talking about trade deadline chatter, but that's also when things tend to heat up. Teams know what they are by then, and front offices start making real decisions about the future. And it just so happens that the Lakers have already shown a willingness to take on longer contracts now. That's a big shift in philosophy compared to the past couple of seasons, when they were clearly reluctant to commit beyond a year or two. For someone like Herb, who just signed a deal that locks him up for the foreseeable future, that's crucial. And look, Herb Jones probably isn't going to be a starter in New Orleans. The Pelicans are loaded with young talent, and while he's one of their better defenders, he might end up as more of a sixth or seventh man in that rotation. That's not a knock on him. It's just the reality of their roster construction. And when a guy of his caliber starts slipping into that odd man out role, teams like the Lakers need to be circling. Here's another thing. If the Lakers were weighing whether to give up assets for Andrew Wiggins or for Herb Jones, personally, I'd go after Herb. Wiggins has the pedigree, the finals experience, and he's absolutely a great player when locked in, but if you're sending out draft capital and rotation guys, Herb just feels like the smarter investment. Younger, cheaper, more upside defensively. If the asking price is the same, or even if you've got to sweeten the pot a little with an extra pick swap, I'd still prefer Herb Jones. So you see the picture starting to form, right? On one side, you've got Luca already pushing for these guys, Smart and Herb. On the other, you've got the Lakers front office openly exploring the trade market, actively engaged in talks around players like Andrew Wiggins. If the Wiggins price doesn't drop, and if things stall, the window for Herb could open wide come January. And I'll tell you this much, if you can imagine a lineup of Luca Donic, Andrew Wiggins, Herb Jones, LeBron James, and DeAndre Ayton, that has the makings of the best starting five in the league. You'd have shooting, defense, athleticism, versatility, every single box checked. Both Wiggins and Herb are capable of giving you 20 points on any given night, but they also fit perfectly as complementary players alongside stars like Luca and LeBron. That's the beauty of it. They don't need the ball to make an impact, and that's exactly the type of player LA needs right now. All right, so continuing from what we just talked about with Luca Donic and Herb Jones, here's the thing. Based on everything we know leading up to his extension, the Pelicans aren't exactly opposed to trading Herb. They're not going to just hand him away, of course. They want the right price, and that's fair. But it opens the door for the Lakers to really get creative. You might even be looking at a three-team trade scenario to make it work. Some clever front office maneuvering where everybody wins, because you can't just send a straight package and expect New Orleans to bite. Now, let's talk contracts. Herb Jones is making something like $25 million a year, give or take, and honestly, I'd rather pay him that than pay Austin Reeves $35–40 million a year. No disrespect to Reeves, he's a talented player, but from a pure two-way impact perspective, Herb just offers more. He's versatile, he can guard multiple positions, and he fits beautifully alongside stars like Luca. He's that kind of complementary piece that can elevate an entire roster. And here's why that matters so much. Luca's success in Dallas, especially with guys like Jalen Brunson and Kyrie Irving, shows how effective it can be to have a secondary playmaker or a secondary shot creator. If LeBron ever steps away, you don't want a gap in that role. You want someone who can pick up the slack, someone who can contribute without needing the ball every second. Herb Jones fits that profile perfectly. He doesn't need to dominate the offense. He just makes everything around him better. Now, let's factor in the center position. DeAndre Ayton is already an upgrade over what Dallas has had historically at center. His offensive game alone is better than anything Luca had previously. And defensively, he's solid enough to anchor a front court. Pair that with two high-end wings, say Herb Jones and another emerging star, or a player like Derek Duro, who can evolve into that role, you've basically solved the rotation for the Lakers. You throw in a bench scorer like Malik Monk, someone who can come in and hit shots without disrupting chemistry. And suddenly, your lineup has both balance and firepower. You're not just competitive, you're a perennial contender. You're one of the best teams in the league. Of course, we have to be honest about the concern. Health is always a factor, especially with Herb. Last season was rough for him. He played only 20 games, but context matters. The entire Pelicans roster was decimated by injuries. If we look at his career before that, he's been incredibly durable. 76 games one season, 66 the next, 78 another. That 20-game season seems like an outlier, the kind of bad luck year we've seen other players have. If he returns to playing 70-plus games consistently, the Lakers are in excellent shape long-term. Now let's break down the stats a bit. Last season, Even in just 20 games, he averaged 32.4 minutes, took 8.6 shots per game, shot around 43 to 44% from the floor, and hit 31% from 3 on 3.6 attempts per game. Not great, but his career three-point percentage is around 37%, so that's more of a normal baseline. Two-point range? About 53%. Again, slightly below his usual, but solid. Free throw shooting remains excellent, 82.5% for his career. He also contributed roughly 4 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 2 steals, half a block, and 10 points per game. Those are strong, well-rounded numbers for a two-way wing. If we look at the season before that, which is really a better sample size, he played 76 games, starting all of them, and averaged 31 minutes per game. He shot 50% from the floor, 42% from 3 on 3.6 attempts, 56.8% on 2-point shots, with an effective field goal percentage just under 60%. Free throws, 86.7%. He averaged 6 rebounds, just under 3 assists, 1.5 steals, and a bit over 10 points per game. That's the player you're getting when healthy, reliable, efficient, versatile, and exactly the kind of piece that elevates a contender. So, yes, there are minor risks with Herb Jones, mainly around durability, but the potential upside far outweighs that. If the Lakers can make a move, whether via a clever trade or creative multi-team deal, Herb Jones could be the missing puzzle piece that takes this roster from great to elite. All right, let's wrap this up. One thing to keep in mind when looking at Herb Jones is context. Last season, the Pelicans were missing key pieces like DeAnthony Melton and Trey Murphy, so their offense was all over the place. Herb often had to create his own shot, take on responsibilities that normally wouldn't fall on him, and that's exactly why his percentages dipped. But imagine him alongside Luca long-term. He's not going to be the primary creator anymore. He's going to be in a system where Luca draws attention, LeBron handles the high-level orchestration, and other complementary pieces are spacing the floor. That's going to elevate Herb's efficiency. He might not hit 42% from 3 immediately, but 38 to 40% alongside elite playmakers? That's entirely realistic. Now think about the defensive side. Herb Jones is versatile. He can guard 1 through 4, which makes him an ideal foundation piece for a team looking to compete at the highest level for years. Combine him with Luca, DeAndre Ayton, and yes, potentially keeping Austin Reeves, and suddenly you have a lineup that is both physically imposing and strategically flexible. You're not just winning games, you're building a team that can dominate for the foreseeable future. Add another high-level 3-and-D wing, and the Lakers could realistically be one of the best teams in the league, year in and year out. Of course, a lot hinges on whether the Pelicans are willing to trade him and what the asking price would be. From what we've seen, New Orleans has shopped Herb before, and teams rarely shop a player and then say, "Never mind, we're keeping him." It's about finding the right value, and if the Lakers present a package that works, say, a first-round pick, a couple of pick swaps, maybe someone like Dalton Cager or Rui Hachimura thrown in, they could get it done. Personally, I'd rather overpay slightly for Herb Jones than give that same package for Andrew Wiggins. Why? Because Herb is the answer at the 3 or 4 for Luca's entire extension. You're locking in long-term stability, which is invaluable. Looking beyond the immediate season, Herb Jones also becomes a trade asset. If a superstar like Giannis or Nikola Jokic were ever on the market, Herb has more trade value than a Wiggins or a Hachimura. Imagine combining Austin Reeves, Herb Jones, and a couple of future first-round picks. Suddenly, the Lakers have a compelling package to offer a contender who can't bottom out or has limited draft assets. That's the type of forward-thinking roster management that separates contenders from pretenders. So, at the end of the day, the Lakers are in a fascinating position. They have Luca pushing for specific pieces, a willingness to take on long-term contracts, and multiple avenues to improve both now and in the future. Herb Jones could very well be that missing piece that turns this team into a perennial powerhouse. As always, this is a conversation, and I want to hear from you. What do you think? Could Herb Jones be the key to the Lakers' next era? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And hey, If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button. It really helps me keep putting out content like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss future updates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. It's confirmed, folks. And when I say confirmed, I mean multiple huge updates just dropped, including a brand new report surrounding Andrew Wiggins and Rob Pelinka, and the Lakers' pursuit of one of the top wings in the league. Today, we're going to break down all of these new reports, discuss what it could mean moving forward, and I'll even touch on some intriguing updates surrounding Luca Donic, because, let's be honest, this offseason has been absolutely electric for him, and there's a ton to unpack. But before we jump in, quick reminder, if you're part of that percentage who aren't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You guys have been absolutely incredible supporting the channel, and it's honestly been wild to see how much engagement we've had over the past few weeks. I really appreciate it. Now, let's get into the real story, because the #1 talking point right now has been, hands down, the Lakers and a potential trade involving Andrew Wiggins. So, here's the latest. Over the past few days and weeks, there's been non-stop chatter about the Lakers possibly moving for Wiggins. Names have floated around, trade scenarios have been speculated, and analysts like Mark Stein and Dan Wyke have been dropping hints and updates for some time now. And today, for the first time, we've gotten that official confirmation. Yes, the Heat and Lakers are actively engaged in trade talks for Andrew Wiggins. That's right. They're not just talking hypotheticals anymore. These discussions are live, and if a deal is going to happen, it could be as soon as this week. Now, the language in the reports is really key here. We've known for a while that the Lakers were exploring options, but nothing ever fully materialized, partly because the Lakers were hesitant to give up their first-round pick. But according to the new reports, this is a situation that's evolving, especially if the Heat are open to negotiation and maybe adjusting their asking price. And when you look at it from the Lakers' perspective, it makes total sense. The market's quiet right now, no one is making massive splashes, and if they want to land a player of Wiggins' caliber, this is the perfect opportunity to strike. And here's the thing about Wiggins. Putting him on this team transforms them immediately. I saw a quote that perfectly sums it up. He'll be guarded by the 4th best defender every night, playing alongside 3 elite playmakers, and the odds of this combination failing are incredibly low. Wiggins doesn't just make the Lakers better, he pushes them into true championship contender territory. They're already a strong team, no question, but adding him to the mix changes the conversation entirely. It's not hyperbole to say that he makes this roster a legitimate title threat. On top of that, we're seeing other trade chatter circulate, like 3-team trade pitches involving the Nets, Mavericks, and Luca Doncic's preferred lob target. Now, this isn't directly connected to Wiggins, but it highlights just how active this market is and how the Lakers are evaluating every possible angle to improve. We've even seen Daniel Gafford's name come up repeatedly. While Gaffford is a solid player and could add value, the reports make it clear he's not the solution. Wiggins is the missing piece. He's the player who actually moves the needle for this roster, and that's what makes this news so significant. Honestly, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, the Lakers' approach is classic Rob Pelinka: quiet, calculated, and precise. He doesn't make noise for the sake of it. He works behind the scenes, and when something finally pops up, you know it's the real deal. This isn't speculation or a rumor mill, it's official. And for Lakers fans, it's an incredibly exciting time because it could change the trajectory of this team's season almost immediately. All right, let's dive a little deeper into the trade chatter surrounding Andrew Wiggins, because, honestly, this is where things get really interesting. The latest reports are suggesting that the Heat are eyeing some serious compensation if they're going to even consider moving Wiggins, and it makes total sense. Right now, we're talking about the Lakers potentially giving up their 2031 first-round pick. That's not a small thing, and from what I've seen, the Lakers are very protective of their draft assets. They don't want to just hand that over for a big man, or really for anyone who doesn't move the needle in a major way. But Andrew Wiggins? That's a different story. That's a player who could transform your roster immediately. Now, Looking at the reported package, the Heat's asking price seems to include Dalton Connect plus that 2031 first-round pick. And at the moment, the Lakers aren't fully on board with that, at least publicly, because it's a high price. Their draft capital is already limited, and they have to be careful. But here's the thing. If you really think about the Lakers roster and what Wiggins brings, I'm firmly in the camp of trade the pick if necessary. If they can get him, it probably should have been done months ago. And when you step back and look at the Western Conference right now, the timing actually makes a lot of sense. The offseason has been relatively quiet. Not many teams have made huge moves, so if the Lakers want to push to the top, now's the perfect opportunity. Honestly, there aren't many other additions out there that drastically improve a team at the level that Wiggins does. Yeah, there's talk of guys like Daniel Gaffford, Quentin Grimes, and other solid pieces. But let's be real, they're not going to move the needle in the same way. Wiggins is the game changer here, the player who could instantly elevate this team into true championship contention. Let's talk about Wiggins' value for a second. Last year with the Heat, in 17 games, he averaged 19 points per contest. Now, we're not expecting him to drop 19 every night. He's not going to be the primary scorer. But those numbers show what he's capable of. And if you go back a few seasons, during his time with the Warriors in 2021 to 2022, he was an absolute force. A starter, a key defender, a complementary piece on a championship team. Steve Kerr even highlighted him as one of the most important players outside of the core stars like Steph Curry and Draymond Green. That says a lot about the kind of player he is. He knows how to win, he knows how to play within a system, and he's versatile enough to fill whatever role is needed. And here's another point that doesn't get talked about enough. The Lakers' current roster has an embarrassment of offensive riches. You've got LeBron, Austin Reeves, and Luca. Those three will take the majority of scoring attention. Wiggins doesn't need to be the focal point offensively. He can do his job on both ends, and because of that, he's extremely valuable. He can focus on defense, cover top-tier players night in and night out, and still contribute offensively when needed. That's a rare combination. He's not just a scorer or just a defender. He's the full package, someone who can make the other stars around him better without dominating the ball himself. Finally, before we pivot to Luca Donic, I want to touch on the broader picture here. The Lakers' front office has been strategic all off-season. Every move, every potential trade, every name thrown around, it's calculated. Wiggins is the target, not Gaffford, not Grimes, not anyone else. If they're giving up assets, it's for a player who changes the trajectory of the team. And that's why this news is so significant. These talks are real, they're serious, and the Lakers are in a position to make a major move. Now, switching gears slightly, let's talk about Luca Donic because he's had a phenomenal offseason. One of the biggest storylines has been his conditioning. He just wrapped up the Eurobasket tournament and absolutely dominated, showing a level of fitness and agility that's noticeably improved from last year. Reports and interviews, like the one with Jason Gay from the Wall Street Journal, confirm that Donic completely revamped his off-season regimen. For the first time, he took a month completely off from playing basketball. Instead, he focused purely on training, fitness, and even incorporated paddle tennis to stay sharp and agile. This is a different level of commitment, and it's something that's clearly paying off. The takeaway here is clear. The Lakers are quietly positioning themselves for big moves. Wiggins could be the centerpiece, and players like Donic are elevating their games to a whole new level. This offseason is far from over, and there's still a lot to monitor. All right, so let's wrap this up with Luca Donic, because his offseason story is absolutely wild and really gives us a sense of how dedicated he's been. So basically, for an entire month, he didn't touch a basketball. No games, no shooting, no scrimmaging, nothing. And honestly, it didn't hurt him one bit. In fact, it looks like it may have done the opposite. He came back completely refreshed and dominated in Eurobasket. Now, obviously, that's not the NBA. The level of competition is different. The athleticism, the size, 5 guys who are 6'10", small forward beasts, those guys are everywhere in the NBA. But still, watching Doncic in Eurobasket, you can see that he's in incredible shape. He's stronger, more explosive, and just moves better. From what I've read and seen in the reports, his off-season regimen was no joke. Resistance band training, heavy deadlifts, dumbbell, all the conditioning drill. He was focused on everything. And Jason Gay from the Wall Street Journal described this summer as the start of what he calls the revenge tour. Now, obviously, that's a little tongue-in-cheek, maybe aimed at critics like Nico Harrison who have questioned his conditioning in the past, but you can't deny the results. This is a man on a mission, and you can feel it in how he plays. And let's be real here, he's poised for a monster season. Probably LeBron's last year in Los Angeles, maybe. Who knows what happens beyond this season, but right now, the Lakers are set up for a big push. And this all ties right back into Andrew Wiggins. If you ask me, the Lakers have to go for it. Trade that pick, move whatever they need to, because it's confirmed they are actively in trade talks. The conversations are real, and the stakes are high. Wiggins isn't just another player. He's a legitimate difference maker, someone who instantly makes the Lakers a contender at the highest level. So, in summary, the Lakers are quietly but strategically positioning themselves. Wiggins could be the missing piece to elevate this team into true championship contention, while Doncic is coming into the season stronger, faster, and sharper than ever. The pieces are aligning, and the Lakers are making moves behind the scenes that we'll likely see play out in a major way very soon. The offseason may be quiet on the surface, but trust me, the action is happening. And this could be one of the most pivotal moves we've seen all year.